Good afternoon. I'm John Auten, the RA consultant for Kentucky Baptist and Kentucky WMU. And this is our Campcraft lesson for the day. Earlier today in the RA lesson that Zach taught, we learned about missionary Betty Butcher. Betty lived in Thailand in a house built on stilts. Stilts kept the house up off the ground so that during the rainy season, the house was protected, and when the ground was flooded with rainwater, the house was up out of the way. During the dry season, Betty used the space under her house as an extra room. And in that extra room, she taught the local women how to make beautiful Christmas ornaments that they could sell and raise money for their families. Thinking about that extra room, I'm reminded of tents. When we go camping, a tent is our extra room. It keeps us dry in the rain, and it also protects us from the wind and other elements when we're out camping. And in the Royal Ambassador Campcraft Achievement Plan, being able to help set up a tent is one of the equipment and shelter requirements at the camper level. Knowing how to set up a tent by yourself is one of the requirements for the woodsman patch. Information about different types of tents and how to pitch a tent is found in the Campcraft manual. I've shown you that before, the Campcraft manual. The information about tents is on pages 32 through 36 in chapter 2 about equipment and shelter. This manual can be downloaded for free at this location, kywmu.org/campcraft. So today, we're talking about shelters, talking about tents, and I'm going to walk through the steps of how to set up a simple dome tent. Before I do that, I'm going to switch to the other camera on my laptop, and then I will move around over there. Okay, we're going to set up a simple dome tent today. And one of the first things you need to do is you want to pick your tent site. And when you go to pick your tent site, you want to pick an area that is fairly level, but it's also not in a drainage area or a low area where the water will collect. You want it to be kind of on a slight rise, and you want the ground to fall away from it. So here at my house, I've been doing these videos in the backyard, but there's not really any good places in the backyard to set up a tent. But here in the front yard, this spot is fairly level up close to the house, and then the ground slopes away towards the road. Over here, occasionally you're going to hear a car go by. I hope they're not too loud or cause too much trouble. But anyways, this is probably the best spot in my yard to set up a tent is right here. It's fairly level. The water would run away from the tent. It's not underneath a tree with any overhanging branches, particularly dead branches that could fall on the tent overnight if the wind begins to blow strong or the rain comes up. So you don't want to be under a branch like that. You want to look over the ground, and you want to make sure that there's not any sticks or stones that could puncture the bottom floor of your tent or make it uncomfortable to sleep. And so you want to pick those up and toss those aside, get them out of the way. If you're going to a place where a lot of people camp, you'll want to make sure to camp in a spot that's been used before for a tent, because we don't want to damage more extensive areas of the ground, killing off the ground cover. If there's a place that's already been camped in, then you want to choose that. Just make sure it fits all the requirements. If you're backpacking and you're stopping to camp along a trail, you can oftentimes find places that have been used before for tent camping. They're normally near a water source. Typically, you want to be about 200 feet away from the water source and 200 feet away from the trail as well. And if there's an existing site, go on and use that. If not, try to do as little damage as possible to the area where you're going to be camping. You want to leave no trace is the concept that we like to use when it comes to camping. So this is an area I think would be good for setting up a tent. There's no overhanging branches over the top of me. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to lay down your ground cloth. Typically this is some kind of tarp, and I have one here. And I will tell you this about tarps and ground covers. You don't want them to be bigger than the footprint of the tent. So my ground cover, or my tent is has a footprint that's about 5 feet by 5 feet. Excuse me, it's 7 feet by 7 feet. My tarp here is about 7 feet 8 inches by 5 feet 8 inches. So for the part that would extend beyond it, I'm going to fold it up underneath. And the reason you do that is if your ground cover sticks out below or beyond the footprint of the tent, when the rain falls and it runs down the side of the tent, it'll land on the tarp material and then run back underneath the tent, creating a puddle between your ground cover and your tent floor. And if that water stays there a long time, eventually it's going to seep through the bottom of your tent floor, even if it's a waterproof tent floor. So this tarp that you put down is an extra moisture barrier, and you don't want any water between it and the bottom of your tent. So I'm going to spread out my ground cover here. I'm going to try to put the extra material for my tent here at the front so that I can show you what I do if there's extra protruding out from there. All right, so I've got my ground cloth down, and then you want to take your tent. You want to unfold it as well. As you can see, this is the 5 feet 8 inches, and my 7 foot footprint is definitely well beyond that. If I was going to get a tarp, a ground cover to go with this tent, I would buy something bigger and then cut it down. I mean, you can even use a sheet of black plastic and then cut it to the right size and just cut it a couple inches within what your footprint would be. I use this tarp for hammock camping, and so I don't want to alter it in any way. I'm just using it here today as demonstration. So, but you can see it's really not wide enough. It ought to come out to about here, but it's probably a little bit too long here in the front. So as you can see, there's too much here in the front. And so what I would do is I would just fold this under this way. Like that. And then lay my tent back down. Now, a lot of people will save the stakes until they get the tent poles put in the tent, and that's one way to do it. Other people like to go on and put the stakes in so the floor of their tent is spread and nice and tight, and that's what I'm going to do today. I've got 8 stakes that came with this tent. 2 of them are for the rain fly. 6 of them are for the tent. There's 1 at each corner, and then the back of this tent extends a little bit. So there's loops back there where you can stretch that out. But first I'm going to stake the corners. You want to put these tent stakes in at an angle, like this. If you're pulling against it this way, you don't want it like this. It'll just pull it right out. So you want the tension to be almost at a 90-degree angle from the angle of the tent stake. And the ground's really soft today. It rained a couple days ago, so I can just push those in, but if it's a little bit harder, you might want to have a hammer or a mallet with you. You stake in the first corner and then come over here and pull this tight. And stake in that next corner. Come back here to the back corner, do the same thing. Pull it tight against that one and this one. Then you do your last corner over here. Pull it tight. And like I said, this tent has a little extra extension on the back side. So you just come back here to these loops. Pull them back as well. Nice and tight. Stake them in. There you go. So I've got my tent laid out. I don't know if you can quite see it, but there's my ground cloth underneath. I'm going to pull that out a little closer. But it doesn't extend beyond the footprint of the tent. All right, so next we put in the poles. This is a dome tent, and so it has two poles going from one corner to the other and then crossways. These poles are held, they're fiberglass, and they're held together by elastic shock cords. Makes it easy to take them apart, but keep the pole together. You just unfold it like this and make sure it slides in each of the joints. I usually just lay that out in one of the corners, and I'll do the same thing with this pole as well. And when you put the poles in, you'll notice on your tent along the angles here, there's a sleeve. In older tents, that sleeve might come all the way down to the corner. But in newer tents, they've made them shorter, makes them a little easier to put up. And then partway down the wall of the tent, there's these clips that you clip onto the pole once the tent is erected. Now, one thing about putting these poles in, you don't want to pull them through. If you try to pull them, they come apart. So you want to push them through the sleeves. So I'll start here. Make sure you hold on to the tent material and just push it through there. Right in the center of the tent at the top is usually a loop of some sort. You got to push the pole through there as well. And then through the sleeve on the other end. Just push it so that that end is right down there near that corner. And I'll do the same thing with the other pole. Push it through. You also want to make sure it goes through the loop here at the top. And into the other sleeve. All right, so I've got that in there. Next thing you do is you want to start with this last one I slid through because it's on top. I like to put the one on top and flex it first. Down here in the corner of your tent where you put your stake, there's a little pin that's attached to that ring. In the bottom of your hole here in your joint, it's a hollow space, and you put that pin right in that hollow space. You push it up in there, and you go back to the back corner and you flex the pole so that you can put the other end in the pin on that corner. You might need to pull the tent material towards you a little bit. Center it up. All right, then you repeat the process with the other pole. I'm going to put this back one in first. And come around here and do the front one. Just flex it up like that. Slip it on that pin. All right, then you go around and remember the clips. You clip those on the pole all the way around. There we go. All right, so that's getting the tent up. You can't really see it. See this mesh here inside the door? There's a little window. You could zip that down and just leave the mesh open and roll that door halfway down. That would allow air in there, or you could roll the whole thing back and roll it up and loop it in there. On the sides, upper sides of this tent, on either side and on the back side, the wall is just mesh. So if you were going to be camping and you've checked the weather and you know it's a nice night, there's no rain at all in the forecast, you could leave that open like that and not put a rain fly on it because you know you're not going to be wet. But if there's a possibility of rain or heavy dew in the morning, you're going to want to put your rain fly over the top of it. The rain fly is also made of waterproof material, just like the wall of the tent. And it rests on top of the poles, creating space between the tent wall and the fly. That allows air to circulate. It helps it to remain cooler in there and helps to deal with any moisture buildup that you may have. Now this particular fly on the front side has a little, kind of a little porch space where it goes out. So the front of it has a little sleeve in it. So I want to find that. If you can tell, it's right there. There's a little sleeve. So that's the front of this fly. And the way the fly goes on, at each corner, there's this strap, a little bit of elastic at the bottom, and just a hook. And you just come down here in the little ring that you put your tent stake to. You just hook that right around that ring on each corner. Kind of center it up on those holes along with the seams. And then each side has some Velcro here, and you just Velcro that right around the pole. That helps to keep it centered up. I mentioned the little canopy porch part here. There's a smaller set of poles. There's 3 sections. Up underneath the edge of the fly attached to the tent. On either side is a little grommet. So you want to put this pole through the sleeve here. And then put the end of this in this grommet. And then do the same thing on the other side and it'll flex out. Like that, and give you a little awning type thing. On the sides of these tents, of these flies, there's a little loop. And it comes with a guy line with a device to help you pull it tight. And so you just tie this to the loop. I like to just put the working in through and then come back around and just tie an overhand knot around the standing part, and that creates a slip knot, and I can just slide that back up like that. Then you take your stake, you put it out here, you put this loop right here around the stake. Then you can just pull that up tight like that. Helps keep that out of the way, helps with ventilation and air circulation. Do the same thing on the other side. All right, there you go. And you can open your tent door. This tent has a flap that overlaps the zipper on the bottom, so as the rain hits it, it'll run off over the top instead of settling into the zipper. So that's kind of a neat little feature there. And there's the inside of your tent. It's a little bag over there on that wall where you can put wallet, keys, phone, things like that. There's also a little bag that can be hung from the top of it. There's a little hook up there as well. You can hang a light. And that's how you set up a simple dome tent and have it ready. So I'm going to walk back around. Okay, so you put your sleeping bag, your gear in there, and you're ready to camp. You have an extra room out on the trail in the middle of the woods, a place where you can have shelter, be protected from the rain, be protected from the wind and the other elements. And that brings me back to our story about missionary Betty Butcher. She used her extra room, we talked about, to help those ladies have a place where they could learn this skill, where they could make these Christmas ornaments and sell them in order to provide income for their families. But while they were making those Christmas ornaments, Betty would tell them the story behind the ornaments. She would tell them the Christmas story and about the birth of Jesus and the life of Jesus and the fact that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and rose again so that we might have forgiveness of our sins and that we might find refuge and shelter in Jesus Christ. Jesus was the fulfillment of Isaiah 25:4, which says, "For you have been a stronghold for the poor, a stronghold for the humble person in distress, a refuge from the rain, a shade from the heat, when the breath of the violent is like rain against a wall." That's Jesus for us. He is our stronghold. He is our refuge. He is our shelter. He protects us like a strong fortress wall. And Betty Butcher would tell these women about Jesus, whose love could shelter them and provide them with life. And so, whenever you go camping and set up a tent, remember not only how Betty Butcher used her extra room to provide a place for the women to learn and to provide an income, but as a place to share the gospel. And also remember from your tent, let it remind you that Jesus Christ is our one true shelter who provides us life and protection from the storms of life. So I thank you for joining me for this Campcraft lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back next week for another one. Thank you. See you then.